Hi, it's Stu, and this is going to be a reading review, or yes, some book thoughts of books that I read, some before I left for Oregon, and some that I read while traveling and while in the woods. So while I was traveling on the bus, I listened to and then read in the physical and the digital as well. So I did a really hybrid reading of The Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, and I believe that translator was Jay Rubin. That was my third Murakami book, and I think it was my favorite one. Now, I have proximity bias perhaps, but in this, it's a kind of a mystery. There's a lot of flashback to the World War II period, and the Japanese occupation in Manchuria, which I found very informative. And I just thought that the sort of like dreamlike state worked best in that. Of course, there's always some problematic things about a Murakami book but this one seemed to have less and bother me a little bit less. So we're following a protagonist who one day he and his wife find a missing cat, or their cat's missing, so they kind of go to a medium to help find their cat. Then the wife goes missing, and then the main character meets there's always a teenager in Murakami's books, and they always sort of like embody the angst, the existential angst that's needed for the book. But there's like this walled off alley behind the protagonist's house, and in it there's an abandoned house that has some intrigue and mystery around it, and there's a waterless well. And so there's a motif of water, of war, of the surreality of war. And there are things that happen in this well, there's plenty of characters that he meets in his quest to find his wife, and ultimately maybe even figure out himself, as he's quit his job. He worked in a lawyer's office and he doesn't think that's for him. And yeah, it's a big book. So that's that. I will talk about a few that I have the copies of. Everything that I read while I was in Oregon, or started, some I read and some were memoir and they're really not for me, and then just read as much as I wanted to. And then when it was time to leave, all of those books that I took to Oregon have been unhauled into little free libraries in Portland. So I will move on to Blood Sugar by Sasha Rothchild. I got this from the St. Vincent de Paul, which has the 10 books for $5 sale. And I remember getting it basically because of the cover. This is a mystery thriller. Yeah, there's sort of a serial killer. We get a little of her inner thoughts. The blurb says she's accused of 4 murders. She's guilty of 3. She's accused of murdering her husband, which she doesn't do, but she did murder the other people. This book for me was terrible. This was not a good book. I can really problematize. There's a moment when the main character's husband's mother kind of comes into play, and the mother had abandoned the child, and we take this really unexamined, misogynistic, patriarchal view of, even there's a diatribe about, the total feelings of this mother to abandon the child, even though the father is described as violent and a bully and abusive. Yet the mother holds all of the responsibility of being a terrible person. The reason that she abandoned the child could only be because she's a terrible person, not because it's the only way to escape with her life or well-being in any case. Yeah, we see, this goes through sort of investigations and following leads, and will she get away with any of the murders or be condemned for the falsely accused murder of her husband? not a good book at all. I personally wouldn't recommend it at all, but you know, people like different things than I do, and they like mystery thrillers and twists that they don't care if they're obvious or not. Ripeness by Sarah Moss is a completely different kind of read, where Blood Sugar was clearly a really sort of commercial, not very well thought out, plot driven book. Ripeness had plot, but this is a very quiet and pensive book. I think there's tender and rueful is what one of the blurbs say in the back, and I think that both of those adjectives really summarize the vibe of this book. We have dual timelines. We have some flashback into the childhood of our older protagonist, who's, I believe, in her 70s. In this book, and she's living in Ireland, and she's a Jewish immigrant from Germany, and her mother and father are Holocaust survivors, and that sort of really impacts her sort of view of immigration. And there is a look in this book of the contemporary sort of anti-immigrant sentiment as described in this book in Ireland. And there's some contention between our protagonist and her really good friend, because her good friend holds some anti-immigrant views. And then the flashbacks are of our protagonist going to Italy to help her sister, who was a ballet dancer and pregnant, give birth to a child who, in similar themes, who she gives up for adoption. Some nuns come and take it, and there's a lot of really sort of tense, emotional moments of it that are really looking at the pressure of women in having children, and in feeling a kind of way about a child, even if they are going to give them up for all of the multitude of reasons that someone who birthed a child may choose not to raise it. There's just a lot of introspection on motherhood. The main character's friend has a long-lost brother, I think, who lives in America. There's some connection to America, and that's kind of what kicks off all of this reflection that's coming to meet her. And so, again, we get sort of a panorama view of, what it means to be a mother, the societal demands on motherhood, and on women to be a certain kind of way. Then keeping kind of in with the feminist themes, a book that I enjoyed quite a bit more than either of those two. So Sarah Moss is a great writer. If you want sort of, again, a thoughtful, rueful, sort of quiet book that's really contemplative, then I would go for Ripeness. 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes is a tapestry of the women throughout Greek mythology, especially the Iliad and the Odyssey, sort of their stories told from their POV. I thoroughly enjoyed the author's note. I thought that made the reading of this book even worth it. There were some parts when I found some of the decisions that Natalie Haynes made a bit cringy, but overall, I liked a lot of her decisions. I liked that it was told like as a tapestry through multiple POVs, kind of like almost a survey. It's like a survey of the female POV. And yeah, if you read it, be sure to check out the author's note. This one just kind of came up as a recommendation from the library for one of the bingo prompts that I'd already read for, but I decided to read it because I own the book, and because the Odyssey is out and super hyped now, I thought that it would be a good time to kind of catch up on some of the premises of stories that I have read long ago and has been retold up teen times, but through the POV of women. So I can recommend this to folks that like to dabble in Greek mythology at all, or just like retellings or like to explore women's POV. Okay, The Rental House by Wei Ki Wang. In this, we follow a couple. Yeah, and there's two sort of timelines. There's a rental house when they're freshly married. And both sets of parents come to stay, and there's a bit of drama, I think, where the wife, who's Chinese American, responds in kind to some pretty egregious passive aggressivity towards her, and some regarding race and culture, that the parents of the husband take no accountability for whatsoever. And then we have another rental house when they're further in their marriage, and they have a dog and they have no children, and they are otherwise successful, but are they happy? I think that that's the most I can say about this book without spoiling. I found that my relationship with this book was a little bit complex. There are parts of it that I really liked, and then parts of it that I didn't. But overall, it's not a very long read, and I find it quite insightful. If not some of the themes a little bit tired, some of them some of the sort of even lesser ones that are sort of less overt, I found captivating. So yeah, I'm glad that I read this book, and I would recommend it to folks who kind of like quirky couples trying to figure it out, trying to figure out adulting, and certainly want to explore, like, really see on the page what passive aggressivity looks like around issues of identity, which are core to our existence, and our sense of self. I started William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch when I was in California, and I started listening to it, and the reader was great, but the book is, just an absolute mind muddle. And there is just a lot of toxicity in the book. It's a sharp social criticism, but it's done through, violence and fever dream, and a lot of essay and just really overt racial violence, and so it's a very difficult read. I had seen the adaptation in the 90s, and so I went into it thinking that it was going to be like the adaptation, and it is not at all. It basically, it's plotless set of rantings done by someone who is heavily under the influence of heroin and other drugs, who is looking at the U.S. in a non-glorifying way, in sort of the epoch of the white picket fence. So this book is from the 50s, and being very critical about it, but also describing sort of the margins and life of addicts. I have another book to hold up. That was Coco Miller's Blue Sisters, and I actually got this book from the Friends of the Library in Portland. Rental House I got from a little free library, and 1,000 Ships and Ripeness I actually got from my local Friends of the Library. But this one is about sisters who are grieving. I thought that it was a pretty sharp look at grief and addiction and how the two can intertwine. I thought that there are 3 surviving sisters. One of the sisters has passed. I thought that their characters were mostly fleshed out, and I appreciated that. Often when books are told in, like, the chapters are the different POVs, and it just, the only way that you know it's a different POV is that the name of the chapter tells you it's a different person, but nothing about the writing or the inner life really changes. That I find that very difficult to read in a book, and I think that Coco Miller's fleshes out her characters pretty well. I understand that almost all drama in humans is due to lack of reflection or communication. But I don't know if I think I find that exploration overused and tropey inside of literature and media. And so I think this book leaned into that a little bit. I think that if these characters were a little bit more reflective or a little bit more communicative, some of the hardships that we are seeing experienced would be mitigated. I also don't think that the line of, like, the relationship with their mother and how they blame their mother, their fraught relationship with their mother, I don't think that that was fully fleshed out. I think a lot was missed. And we kind of went through, like, it's all the mother's fault, she's a terrible mother, to, okay, but, you know, what options did she have, like, really quickly, without any real, like, these are very adult women. They are in their 30s, pushing 40s, I think. When maybe it's because they haven't had children, but when they should be having more sophisticated, complex, and informed thoughts about the role of their mother in their life. But there was another book, I guess, where we're looking at a little bit, it's really focusing on grief, but I think that this sort of, again, sort of had a really unexamined, not as egregious as Blood Sugar, but yeah, I just felt like it was leaning into sort of stereotypes that could have been explored a little bit more carefully about how mothers should be. Okay, so yeah, The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. I read that while in the wilderness, and I had let me see, the other Lauren Groff book I had read was The Matrix. And interesting enough, I read The Matrix also while I was in Oregon. So, and you'll see in the haul video, hauled another Lauren Groff book while there. So I guess Lauren Groff is my sort of Oregon author. The premise was, actually Roanoke. And we are following the story of a servant girl who's had a lot of hardships in her backstory. So we kind of get some flashbacks or backstory about her life in London and what that looked like. And then we get an insight into, she's starving and it's a really difficult time. There's the famines hitting the attempted colony, and for reasons that I maybe shouldn't say to not give any spoilers for people who like plot points, she escapes into the wilderness, and ergo the Vaster Wilds. And the story kind of oscillates between her attempt at survival in the wilderness and, sort of the backstory of the hardships in her life and how she came to find herself in this situation of fighting to survive and the things that she needs to do. It's sort of reminiscent a little of The Remnant, but instead of just focusing always on the story of the man, we have now a story of the woman, and Lauren Groff does that. So I found it, I like her writing. It's very almost dreamlike, and she's covering really real topics in a sort of like dreamlike prose in both Matrix and The Vaster Wilds. So yeah, plenty of folks who I've been talking to recently find themselves tell me that they're the Lauren Groff fans. I wouldn't put her in my top authors, but both of her books have been well worth reading. I then read a book by Shay Earnshaw, and it was, oh my goodness, let me see, can I remember the name of this book? Probably because I want to forget it. It was not a good book. I brought it because it takes place even close to where I was in the Klamath Wilderness in Oregon, and we have the story starts with a girl who's gone missing, and there's someone who's got some sort of like psychic abilities going to look for the girl. And then we kind of fast forward into this sometime later. We have a propulsion through time, and we find ourselves in this sort of really insulated community that can be described only as a cult, where they believe that there's a rot in the wilderness, and the folks living there, if they try to escape the boundaries of this community, they'll get the rot. And so the community, through very authoritarian means, keeps people from escaping. And we kind of get three POVs from a husband and a wife and a sister. The twists for me were ridiculous. I enjoyed the first maybe half of the book, but when the twists started coming in, my enjoyment level was, I just almost found myself skimming I was so far into it that I didn't want to DNF it for whatever reason. And I just remember thinking, this is just ridiculous. And the name of that book was The History of Wild Places. Again, it's me. If you like mystery thriller with a little bit of cult or a little bit of wilderness, and you like twists, then, I'm not saying don't give the book a try. It just didn't work at all for me. But then I read The Plowman of Bohemia, which is a book, it's like a classic from the 1400s. It's by Johann van Saz. Johann van Saz, and the translator is slipping my mind. I'll see if I can find it. It comes with some great illustrations that are like the etches, they're sketches of what is carved into wood because of this story that I think is a bit of lore. And in it, we have a plowman who's living in Bohemia, whose wife, who he finds to be, pure and, in any case, just pure in every way, and she dies. So we then have this conversation between the plowman and death, and this look at happiness and fairness and it's sort of like justice therein. At the end, God this is a very religious work, apropos for, the time. And by that, I mean Christian religion. And then in the end, sort of God comes in and sort of solves this debate. It's a little reminiscent of Job to me. The writing was wonderful. The translator's notes was fantastic. It really wasn't the translator's note. He wrote the foreword. It was an introduction or a foreword to the work, as it's a really old work. And it was given that book for free. I think it's the publication of that actual book that I was reading was in the 1960s. So that was just a reprinting, of, I don't know, maybe the lore of the story, of whatever what they could find from an ancient story from the 1400s. All right, and then lastly, but not leastly, Is it worth mentioning the memoirs? I don't think so. I think, you know, I did get pretty far into them, and I'm not really, I say it all the time, I'm not really a memoir person. So I found it enjoyable to just sit and read and not feel incredibly committed. But it was easy for me to just say, okay, I don't want to haul books back, because when you see my haul video, you'll understand I didn't want to take books back and forth. So whatever I brought down to Oregon, I I was determined to leave there, and thus I didn't finish the memoirs. I didn't feel any kind of like, I don't necessarily read nonfiction cover to cover. I dabble while I read other things, and yeah, I didn't finish them. So here I am talking a lot about books that I'm not going to give you the name, and I apologize, but I will tell you about Ring for Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. I believe this was published in the mid-50s, and I listened to this on my, while traveling back, and you know, this is comedy. This is just pure comedy, and if you're in the mood for something sort of like very witty and very, oh, I recently just watched a British film that this reminded me quite a bit of as well. That's very English and slapsticky and satirical at the same time. Then, you know, this was a delightful little book. How I came about this book is at the Friends of the Library, there were 2 of these, and they were trying to decide, because they have cutoffs of what's classic, what's not classic. Just in any case, there were 2, and 2 of us decided to just take these dollar books and give them a try, because somebody else had read them and thought that they were really fun. For sure, after some heavy reading like Naked Lunch and even The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, this was needed. This is absolutely, pick these up if you just kind of want to have a bit of fun, but that's clever enough, you know, to tickle your brain just a bit. But absolutely, I mean, this is comedy. This, I would just call the genre of this comedy. And with that, those are all of the books that I covered in the last, like, maybe even almost 3 weeks. And I am reading a very big book right now, slowly. So I expect for my sort of like reading pace to slow down a little. I'm totally fine with that. I didn't read very much while out in the woods. In the almost 2 weeks I was in Oregon, I read 5 books plus a couple of parts of memoirs, which is surprisingly few for how much I actually usually read. And so, yeah, it's okay. I was wondering, and I'm curious just to kind of see how much the volume of my consumption is just impacted by life. I have some other ideas and goals that I want to set for the fall outside of reading. So I'll talk more about that, I guess, in future videos. But for now, I absolutely know I have a haul video planned, because I hauled absolutely more books than I should have, but you know, whatever, in Oregon, and I'd like to share that. And then, yeah, until then, happy reading.